Greetings, candidates, and welcome to the Advanced Management Accounting lesson. Today we continue with the study of the management accounting techniques for environmental costs. In our last session, we studied the input-output analysis technique. We studied how the technique can be used for environmental costs. Then we highlighted the benefits and the limitations. Today we're moving on to the second technique known as flow cost accounting. Flow cost accounting is yet another valuable management accounting technique for identifying and allocating environmental costs within an organization. And it differs from the inflow-outflow analysis technique by focusing on the flow of materials and resources throughout the production process rather than just tracking inputs and outputs. We saw that the input and output technique focuses on just tracking inputs and outputs. But this one, the flow cost accounting technique, focuses on the flow of materials and resources throughout the production process. In our today's session, we're going to study how the flow cost accounting technique can be used in environmental costs. We also highlight the benefits and limitations of this method. And therefore, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain how the flow cost accounting technique is used for environmental costs and also highlight the benefits and limitations of the flow cost accounting technique. Welcome to the lesson. And we begin by answering the question, how the flow cost accounting technique is used. How the flow cost accounting technique is used. Now, in this technique, candidates, just like the outflow analysis, there are 5 stages. There are 5 steps. The first step is to identify material flows. Step number 1, identify material flows. Step number 2, quantify material flows. Quantify material flows. Step number 3 is costing material flows. Costing material flows. Number 4, identifying environmental costs. Identifying environmental costs. Then number 5 is allocating environmental costs. Those are the 5 stages that can be undertaken in using the flow cost accounting technique. Step number 1, I've said, is to do what? Identify. Just like in the inflow-outflow, identify material flows. Identifying material flows. Number 2 is to quantify material flows. Quantify. Material flows. Quantify material flows. Quantify. Then 3, costing material flows. Quantify. Quantify, then costing. Costing material flows. 4, identify environmental costs. Environmental identify environmental costs. Then lastly, allocate environmental costs. Allocate environmental costs. Just 5 simple steps. Identify material costs. These are material costs and resources used in the production process, including raw materials. This may include raw materials. It could be water, energy, water, etc. Raw materials that are used in the production process. Identify. Is it raw materials? And if it's raw materials, which materials? Is it energy? Is it water? Identify. Right? Then map the flow of the materials through each stage. Map the flow of the material through each stage. Map the flow of these materials through each stage. Because in all countries, when producing goods or services, there are various stages in the production process. And this you appreciated when you went through the process costing topic in your earlier lessons. There could be process 1, process 2, process 3, process 4. So you do the mapping of the flow of these materials. Step 1, process 1, process 2, process 3. You map the flow of these materials through each stage of the production process, identifying points of waste, identifying points of inefficiency, and also environmental impact. You understand? You map the flow of the raw materials through each stage. Through each stage of the production process. Through each stage. Mapping out the flow of the materials through each stage. Through each stage of the production process. And when doing that, you identify the points of waste, you identify the points of inefficiency, you identify inefficiency, points of waste, inefficiency, and so on. Points of waste. What is the point of waste? Do we have wastage in production 1, process 1? Is it process 2? Do we have inefficiencies in process 3? And so on. Map out the flow. We are discussing the flow cost accounting technique. Do you understand? Then in step number 2, quantify the material flows. Quantify the material flows. Quantify the amount of each material used at each stage. This is at each stage. This is stage of processing the materials. Quantify at each stage. It's not like the input-output analysis where we are only tracing inputs and output. No, this is done at each stage. And the accountant should use the appropriate measurement. Use the appropriate units of measurements. Using appropriate units of measurement. using the appropriate use of measurement. It could be cubic meters, it could be liters, and so on. Tons. Then at this stage, the accountant ought to analyze the data to identify areas where material usage can be reduced or where alternative materials with lower environmental impact can be used. Do you understand? After quantifying, because here the accountant, you identify the points of wastage, point of inefficiency. Then at that point, at every point, you come to step number 2, then quantify what was the tons that are wasted at stage 1. What are the inefficiencies at stage 2? So the purpose for quantifying here, candidates, you can see, is to enable the organization analyze the data to identify areas where usage of materials can be reduced, or where there could be an alternative material with the lower environmental impact. Quantifying material flows. Then in step number 3 is costing material flows. This means assigning environmental costs to each material flow based on their source, based on their volume, and based on their impact. Costing. And it is at this stage that there is that involvement using cost data from purchasing, cost data from, this is cost data, use cost data from purchasing when costing. You can use energy bills, electricity bills when doing the costing. All right? Using cost data from purchasing, energy bills, and other sources to do costing material flows, assigning environmental costs to each stage. Do you understand? Costing material flows. Using cost data from purchasing, energy bills, and so on. The next step is to identify environmental costs. This involves analyzing the costs associated with different material flows, and that can be done by identifying the stages of production process that generate the highest environmental costs. Identify environmental costs by analyzing the costs that are associated with different material flows and identifying the stages of the production process that generates the highest environmental costs. And by so doing, candidates, that will help to prioritize the areas for improvement. That can also help prioritize and also even identify opportunities for cost reduction, because of the fact that the accountant will be able to generate or find out the areas for the areas that generate the highest environmental cost. So there is that priority. All right? Prioritizing areas for improvement and identifying opportunities for a reduction in costs. Identifying environmental costs. Then lastly is to allocate environmental costs. Allocate environmental costs. Allocation of environmental costs. And this is the allocation of the environmental costs to products, to services, to products, to services, and such like. Allocation of environmental costs to products, allocation of environmental costs to departments, services, do you understand? Finally, environmental costs are allocated to products. Because here the environmental cost identification was properly done, then it's possible now to allocate environmental costs to products, to services, to departments, and this allocation is based on their contribution to the overall material flow associated with environmental impact. And that can be done by using various methods, such as the activity-based costing, such as the method we studied last time, which is the mass balance calculations, or even the method known as environmentally adjusted costing system. So those are some of the methods that can be used in allocating environmental costs to departments, to services, or even products. Use various methods. Mass balance calculations, like mass balance calculations, mass balance calculations, and so on. I've mentioned the environmentally adjusted costing system and even activity-based costing. That is a method that may also be used to allocate environmental costs to products or to departments. So these are the stages in the flow cost accounting technique. The first step I've said is identifying material flows. Number 2, quantifying material flows. Number 3, costing material flows. Number 4, identifying environmental costs. Then lastly, allocating environmental costs. Now, having studied how the FCA technique is applied, let's now highlight some of the benefits of using this technique. Benefits. Benefits of using FCA. Benefits of using FCA. The first benefit is that this method leads to improved resource efficiency. Improved resource efficiency. Improved resource efficiency. This method helps identify areas where material usage can be reduced, leading to less wastage and lower environmental impact. That's one obvious benefit. The second benefit of using FCA is cost reduction. Cost reduction. This method identifies opportunities to reduce environmental costs by optimizing material flows and also by implementing cost-saving measures. Product costing, number 3. Product costing. Product costing. The method provides a more accurate and complete picture of product costs by incorporating environmental costs into the costing process. Number 4, decision making. Decision making. The method supports informed decision making about product designs, about product processes, and also environmental investments, environmental investments. 5, compliance and reporting. Compliance and reporting. The method helps compliance with environmental regulations and reporting requirements by providing accurate data on environmental costs and impact. Because remember, the identification of material flows is carried out throughout the stages of production. The material flows are mapped out. There is mapping the flow through each stage, and at each stage the accountants are able to identify points of wastage or points of inefficiency, and with that comes the advantage of compliance and reporting. It helps comply with environmental regulations and reporting requirements by providing accurate data on environmental costs and impacts. Compliance and reporting. Now, as much as this method seems better than the previous one we studied, that does not mean that it has no flaws. There are also limitations of this, using this method. Limitations. What are the limitations of FCA? The first limitation is in relation to complexity. Complexity. Implementing an effective FCA system can be complex and requires significant resources. Because remember that even identifying material flows, mapping the flow through each stage requires significant resources. The process of quantifying material flows at each stage using appropriate units requires significant resources. Costing material flows using energy bills requires technical know-how. Allocating environmental costs using different methods like the activity-based costing or the mass balance calculations method requires technical know-how, and that is a significant resource. The accountants ought to be well versed, ought to be competent enough to apply different methods in allocating environmental costs, and that could pose a challenge when using the flow cost accounting technique. All right? Complexity. Number 2, data accuracy. Data accuracy. Now, this technique requires accurate data on material flows and environmental costs. So that can pose a challenge. Getting data that is accurate can be a challenge when using this method. Allocation methods. Number 3, allocation methods. We mentioned a few methods here, like the mass balance calculations, the activity-based costing, and so on. Choosing the right allocation method can be challenging and can affect the accuracy of cost allocation. You understand? Yes, you do. Number 4, limited scope is yet another limitation. Limited scope. FCA primarily focuses on production processes and may not be suitable for non-manufacturing organizations. This one focuses on material flows. There are some organizations that do not produce tangibles, and therefore this method is limited in scope because it may not be of any help to non-manufacturing organizations. Now, candidates, we've studied how FCA is used. We've highlighted the benefits and limitations of using the FCA technique. And that will mark the end of the lesson. But it's important to note that FCA is a powerful tool for managing and accounting for environmental costs within manufacturing and production-based organizations. It's limited in scope. It's limited to manufacturing and product-based organizations. This technique offers valuable insights into resource efficiency, cost reduction, and product costing. However, candidates, implementing the flow cost accounting technique requires careful planning, requires data accuracy, and also choosing the most appropriate allocation methods to ensure its effectiveness. And therefore, the FCA technique can be integrated with other management accounting techniques such as the IOA, such as the active-based costing, in order to provide a more comprehensive understanding of environmental costs. Furthermore, FCA can be adapted to various industries and can be used for non-environmental purposes also, such as improving operational efficiency, such as reducing wastage. And by using FCA alongside other sustainability initiatives, organizations can significantly reduce their environmental impact and improve their overall sustainability performance. Is that clear? So having said that, I'm going to give you, to read to you today's assignment. I have 3 questions on flow cost accounting. Number 1, how does flow cost accounting track and allocate environmental costs throughout the value chain, and how can this technique be used to identify cost-saving opportunities in environmental management? Number 2, explain how flow cost accounting allows organizations to trace environmental costs to specific activities or processes, and how this granular information supports decision making for environmentally conscious strategies. Then lastly, number 3, in what manner does flow cost accounting aid in evaluating the financial implications of environmental impacts at different stages of production or operation, and how is this information utilized for internal reporting and performance evaluation? Thank you for attending the lesson. Bye-bye.